I find this in a country I'm particularly concerned with, in Nigeria, where it's almost impossible to get most of the media to take seriously the religious motivations of the massacres of Christians and also some Muslims, which are taking place there. Religion is treated as an epiphenomenon. Nobody ever does anything for a religious motive. It's always a mask for something else. We're supposed to say something biographical about ourselves. I think the most important thing for me was that I was at school with Paul McCartney, um, and my life has been basically going downhill from that point. Um, I had a brief stint as a geologist, then taught political philosophy, and now I have a chair in religious freedom at Baylor University in Texas, and I'm attached to two think tanks in Washington, D.C., the Hudson Institute and the Religious Freedom Institute. So, and congratulations, Jenny, for this wonderful book. I blurbed it and appreciated its many strengths. Perhaps the most important for me was your second section, the historical one. I won't comment much on that because it gets me out of my expertise, but digging more deeply into the uses of language and the origins of journalism, for me, was very important. Two notes on that, one more lighthearted one. Your presentation on the Bible and the Ten Commandments reminds me of that old joke that Moses, as far as we know, Moses was the first person ever to download to a tablet from the cloud. So, and one other note on that is Max Weber, the sociologist, once commented along the lines in which you've been doing your digging, that the biblical prophets were the forerunners of a free press. And that's a quote from Weber. So the historical materials I found very important. Second thing which hit me is some of the parallels in our own careers. I got drawn by accident, by providence, certainly not by my own planning, into the subject of the persecution of Christians. And from that to the subject of religious persecution and religious freedom more generally. And always a question I had is, why is this not covered or hardly ever covered in the general news that I see? And then I realized it wasn't necessarily so much the theme of religious freedom per se. It was simply that the subject of religion was ignored, or if addressed, then very shallowly. So, and that is still, let me just give one example. One could give hundreds. I wrote about CNN wrote a story about an attack on a Catholic charity in Taxila in Pakistan. This charity worked with the poor, was very open, and it had Muslim and Christian employees. Of the 12 employees, 6 from Muslims, 6 were Christian. Their center was taken over by terrorists who separated from the Christians from the Muslims, and shot all the Christians and left. CNN commented, there is no indication of a motive. I could maybe suggest a few things, that these were Islamist radicals who were killing Christians and leaving Muslims alone. But that's one small example, but you see this mindset. Or just one other contemporary note. I think most of us will have seen that story about the two employees of the Israeli embassy in Washington who were murdered a week ago. I don't know if any of the media you read on this noted the fact that they were both Episcopalians. Um, so let me throw that out. That probably doesn't illuminate other things in that, but it just shows the complexity here of the relations involved. So people not knowing about religion or not investigating. Jenny works with this. I particularly find this in a country I'm particularly concerned with, in Nigeria, where it's almost impossible to get most of the media, as well as the US government, to take seriously the religious motivations of the massacres of Christians and also some Muslims, which are taking place there. Always people are looking at what is the real motive? Religion is treated as an epiphenomenon. Nobody ever does anything for a religious motive. It's always a mask for something else. And we need to dig more deeply to find that out. And you get, when you get groups, ISIS affiliates, Al-Qaeda affiliates, explicitly kidnapping Christian girls, seeking to convert them, again, we're told this is simply a range war. It's the herders versus the cattle herders versus the farmers. No doubt that's a factor. All these things are intertwined. But this repeated blindness on this and so many other conflicts is striking, and it paralyzes the possibility of doing anything. One other parallel I might note with Jenny, you talk about the role of Bernard Levin in bringing many of these stories to the front and being a major helper in you and your development. A parallel person in the United States would have been the late Abe Rosenthal, who was for a decade the executive editor of the New York Times. After that, he became a columnist and became very interested in the topic of the persecution of Christians and wrote column after column on this subject until he was fired. But Abe, more than anybody, brought this issue and the question of religious persecution and religious freedom to a much wider audience. And I don't think it's accidental that they were both Jewish. And the other major person in America I can think of who did this was my former colleague, Michael Horowitz, that Michael once said he couldn't understand the Christians, that they were not outraged and up in arms about what was going on around the world. Finally, just a question of how do we respond to this? Jenny has given us several excellent practical suggestions. Let me just offer a more general reflection, which she also touches on. One of the major problems is the deficient or erroneous view of the human person, which is all around us in many areas, but particularly it happens in journalism. That the idea is what motivates human beings is money, sex, and power. And when there's something happening, you need to know which of these motives or what combination of them is there. Putting it in a very oversimplified fashion, to restate what I think most of us here agree, human beings are motivated by money, sex, power, and faith. And if you don't understand that, you're just at sea in the modern world, which is an extremely religious one. Okay, thank you again, Jenny, for your wonderful work.